Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jo Davich. I'm the director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library, and the DeKalb Library Foundation, welcome to another in our continuing series of virtual events. A few housekeeping things before we get started this evening. If you would like to ask a question after our formal presentation, please do so by using the Q&A feature for Zoom. You can find the Q&A button at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. Click on it, and then you can type your question in there, and we will answer it in turn. Also, we've enabled live transcriptions this evening for our hearing impaired guests. You can find the CC button at the top or the bottom of your screen, and when you click on it, you can resize the font to make it comfortable for you to read. Our bookseller this evening is Karis Books and More, right here in Decatur, Georgia. Karis Books and More is one of the nation's oldest feminist bookstores and is an independent bookstore who has done so much during the past 2 years to make sure we continue to receive all of the reading materials to get us through whatever the pandemic threw at us. You'll find the ordering link for the book this evening over in the chat, so feel free to click on that and order one or as many copies as you desire. Right now, I would like to go ahead and introduce all of our guests this evening before we begin the panel. So Object Lessons is a series of short, beautifully designed books about the hidden lives of ordinary things. Megan Volpert's Perfume carefully balances the artistry with the science of perfume, the science that takes us into the neurology of scent receptors, how taste is mostly smell, the biology of illnesses that impact scent sense, and the chemistry of making and copying perfume. The artistry of perfume involves the 5 scent families and symbolism, subjectivity in the perfume preference, perfume marketing strategies, iconic scents, and perfumers, why the industry is so secretive, and Volpert's own experiences with making perfume. Megan Volpert is a frequent contributor to Pop Matters and a professor of interdisciplinary studies at Kennesaw State University. She has written or edited over a dozen books, including Closet Cases, Queers on What We Wear, RuPaul's Drag Race and Philosophy, and Boss Broad. Kate Leland is a poet from Austin, Texas. She holds a Master in the Fine Arts from the University of Mississippi and a Bachelor of the Arts from Hendrix College. She currently serves as an associate editor with Sibling Rivalry Press and is an adjunct instructor of creative writing at Illinois Wesleyan University. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in The Hunger, Rust and Moth, and the New Limestone Review. Her chapbook, I Wore the Only Garden I've Ever Grown, was published in 2017 with Headmistress Press. Erica Lewis lives in San Francisco, where she runs Little Homie Apothecary. Her books include The Precipice of Jupiter, Camera Obscura, Murmur in Inventory, the first 2 books of the box set trilogy, Daryl Hall is My Boyfriend and Mary Wants to Be a Superwoman, and All the Real Tears. Her work has appeared in various anthologies, journals, and numerous chapbooks. She was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. Matt Morris is an artist, perfumer, and writer based in Chicago. He has presented artwork internationally, including New York, Germany, Belgium, Denmark. He contributes to artforum.com, art papers, sculpture, and scene, and extra. Additional writing appears in numerous exhibition catalogs and artists' monographs. In 2021, chapters of Morris's writing were included in anthologies Olfactory Art and the Political in the Age of Resistance, Rutledge, and Atom Breathe, de Gruyter with Dr. Dorothy King. Morris is a transplant from Southern Louisiana who holds a BFA from the Art Academy of Cincinnati and earned an MFA in Art Theory and Practice from Northwestern University, as well as a certificate in Gender and Sexuality Studies. In 2017, Morris earned a certification in Fairyology from Doreen Virtue, PhD. Morris is an adjunct assistant professor at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Arielle Zibrak is an associate professor of English and Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wyoming. Her writing on literature, gender, sexuality, and pop culture has been praised by the New York Times and Book Forum and published in American Literary History, Arizona Quarterly, The Baffler, Criticism, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and McSweeney's. She is the editor of Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence, a new centenary essays, and the author of Avidly Reads, Guilty Pleasures. She currently is at work on 2 books, one about the resistance to reform literature on aesthetic grounds by American authors in the progressive era, titled Writing Against Reform, and another about the history of consumer feminism and New Age philosophy in America, titled In the Image of Our Own Desires. We are so pleased to welcome Megan and all of her guests this evening. We are sure this is going to be a crackling good time, and we hope that you all sit back and enjoy it. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to Megan Volpert. Megan?
Ah! Feels like the first day of school, y'all. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for joining us for this wild and amusing experiment in ways to talk about fragrance. Thank you so much to Joe for that lovely introduction, to Georgia Center for hosting us virtually today, and of course to Karis Books, the world's greatest indie bookstore, for providing copies. Thank you also to the participants. I can't wait for you to get to know these 4 folks that I've invited to help me work through the issues about our sense of smell. Erica is running just a little behind, but she'll be joining us in a moment. So the book is basically a recommendation that we ought to live a more fragrant life. So in order to do that, rather than just like read a bunch of bits and pieces, I thought we would invite some people to actually talk about how they processed the bits and pieces that they read. So the book has 8 chapters, which I've assigned 2 of to each of our 4 panelists, I don't know, my friends who are coming to this amazing virtual dinner party that we're having right now. We're going to hear from Erica, who is going to talk to you about chapters 1 and 2, which is science and literature. Erica is also a perfumer. In fact, the fragrance that I have chosen to wear this evening is one that she made with me in mind. It's called 1977, which is a year that I was not even alive. Then we're going to hear from Matt on chapters 3 and 4, which are about space and time. We're going to hear from Kate about chapters 5 and 6, which are about technology and performance. And then Arielle is going to bring it home for us with chapters 7 and 8, which are about the self and the other. So I hope that you are here because you are interested in perfume, but if you are just a friend or a fan of the things that I write, then you will see that this is very much of a piece with those in terms of voice, but is also working on different stuff that I think these folks will be able to help elaborate on. But I just want you to know going into this that unlike, I write a lot of books about things that I'm a fan of, and it's a little weird to say that you're a fan of perfume or like a fan of one of the particular senses that most of us are equipped with. But I wanted to show you the way that I celebrated the book project just today was by getting this tattoo, which means incense way. Incense way is one of the concepts that the book talks about. And it's basically this recommendation that we live the most fragrant possible life. I think as we have our discussion, you'll see kind of what that means and maybe get a sense of how it relates to you. So I'm just going to jump in by reading the book's introduction, and then hopefully Erica will have joined us. But if she is still stuck in traffic, then we will skip right over to Matt for chapters 3 and 4 and come back to Erica when we got a minute to do so. Okay. So while I am reading to you, most of you have seen me read before, so you are aware that I tend to have a pretty quick pace about it. Therefore, it will be impossible for you to soak in everything that is being said. Don't panic. Your own copy should arrive in your mailbox relatively soon so that you can go back and see whatever you might have missed. But also, I would like to make it even more challenging for you to pay attention by asking all the participants to please take a minute to drop into the chat box the fragrance that they are presently wearing. The fragrance that they are presently wearing. And as I said, I'm wearing a perfume that was actually created with me in mind by Erica Lewis, who will present on chapters 1 and 2 very shortly here. Meanwhile, here is the introduction. Oh, I'm so distracted. I already want to read the chat box, but I will go back and look at it later. Here we go. We could just say my father had a strong aversion to perfume so that the origin of my interest in it becomes obvious. Or we could skip over Freud to point a hippy dippy finger at the zodiac, my Libra air sign. Determining an inception point for this passion is less important than sniffing out how it has become fundamentally a part of my character. Perfume has armed and disarmed me. As an object I deliberately and accidentally engage with many times each day, it is a gift to me, and it structures my own giftedness as a spooky punk. Perfume and I suffer from a similar perception problem that we are obnoxious, impenetrable, esoteric. It doesn't take an expert to fathom the complexity of fragrance, only a willing aspirant. So I am here as an amateur aromacologist, making some philosophical observations from the middle of a lifelong exploratory dabble in the impact of odors on the psyche. Admit it, you yourself can conjure up exactly the way your house smelled when you were a kid, or the waft of your favorite cookie in the oven, or the fumes of gasoline. So don't worry that you cannot handle an object lesson in perfume, okay? Sure, you will encounter some new words and some other uses for words you already know. Sometimes the ideas will be weird and fragmentary, other times they will be intuitive and smooth, because that's life and each of us must follow our own nose to navigate it. Consider your confidently advanced and nuanced discernment of the sense of popcorn. You know the dazzling slickness of movie theater yellow and too much saline, but there's also the other one. Its faded glory snaking in low from the workhorse across the hall, slightly burnt, but probably salvageable, oddly captivating, comforting, even as it annoys. Remember that you have developed a strategy that tries to strike a balance between these two smells as you stand at the microwave with your own unpopped bag. Late one afternoon at the high school, my news nerds and I are rushing to meet deadline over a crumpled mountain of popcorn bags. A student raises her hand and I head over to her workstation. She is among the school's best in that high-class suburban way of knowing nothing about life except how to succeed at it in the same blinkered way as a racehorse does. When I arrive at the edge of her personal space, the zephyr of my movement across the room advances ahead and she recoils, scrunches up her nose, narrows her eyes. "You smell like my grandfather," she comments. Her tone is more neutral than what her face betrays, but I pick up a few heads turning in my peripheral. They have come to recognize her many passive aggressions, and most of them wearily capitulate to her strong but fledgling will to power. I bend to look at what's on her screen, see why she called me over. The sweat in her hair from gym class 2 hours ago has reactivated the scent of a costly spa brand shampoo. Responding in the same volume as her commentary, I say, "Then your grandfather has somewhat expensive taste." Satisfied by the slight sting of somewhat, everyone returns peaceably to work. The minutes-long scene they'd hoped for, in which I read this child for filth for any reason at all, does not materialize. After we solve her problem, I nonchalantly touch a hand to the side of my face, bringing my wrist close to my nose, quietly and covertly recentering myself by inhaling a whiff of the fragrance that there is almost no chance her grandfather shares with me, Eau de Forest by Montal. It's mostly a bass note now. The top notes of grapefruit, lemon, and rosemary that first greeted me this morning have burnt off within a half hour of that initial spray. The heart note of ginger fleeing around lunchtime, but its rose companion still a haunting whisper. The base notes, those tougher fixative molecules that should still be available for my wife to smell when I get home from work, are white musk and ambergris. Ambergris is a secretion of the bile duct in some sperm whales so that their bellies can repair after ingesting the shards of a squid's beak. It is literally either vomited or pooped out by whales, and then it floats near a coast and a perfumer snatches it up. Even though the musk of ambergris mimics the earthly sweetness of ode, Ode Forest isn't technically an ode because ode comes from agar trees. When the tree gets infected by a specific type of parasite mold, it produces a resin that is then harvested for fragrance. The rarity and exoticism of ambergris and ode are a large part of their mystique in the perfume industry. Real deal ambergris is no longer really in use almost anywhere. My perfume uses a cheap synthetic approach, and yet a 100 milliliter bottle of Montal costs a whopping $170. I used to fend for myself with not much money, and now I collect fragrances, which is generally considered a very snobby hobby, like being a wine person. One can calculate cost per milliliter of perfume just like cost per glass of wine, and then decide at one point the expense becomes unreasonable. For example, 50 milliliter bottle of Tom Ford's Lavender Extreme, $335. That is too expensive for me, but I am working off a sample provided by my girl Simone at the Tom Ford counter in the basement of Bergdorf's. I want to wear it while writing this introduction because it has an appealing marketing campaign promising a loudly deconstructed synthetic, something perhaps akin to the mood of this book. Other than the price, Lavender Extreme turns out to be not very extreme. It dries down quickly to a vanilla base note, utterly fine, utterly palatable, maybe a little extra clean rather than merely creamy. That's about quality of ingredients, not the mix, because you can mix lavender and vanilla at Bath & Body Works prices. I'm wearing a soapy vanilla, not an edible vanilla. If we are what we eat, we might do well to remember that what we taste is actually around 70% smell. After I'm finished writing today, there's overnight oats made with blueberries and lemon curd awaiting me in the fridge, and it will be set off nicely by Lavender Extreme. The vanilla base note will soften up the tartness of the lemon curd, and whatever is left of the lavender heart note will strengthen the juicy indigo impression of the blueberries. You can radically alter a dine by fragrance, and this is part of why smoke is such an essential ingredient. By accident of the necessity of heating our food in order to cook it, smoke is probably the first human-made fragrance. In New Orleans, Smoke Perfume is a one-woman operation working with small batches of essential oils made from local resources like cypress and satsuma. She's got one heck of a rose grower, though, by the name of Miss Jeanette. The scent of these roses performs a spicy, warming sensation within the body, and the magic is so precise. Roses are an acquired taste for a certain kind of person, like wearing the color pink. So much baggage there. It took me years to get into an experiment with either. Scent is so tenuous, hanging there just a moment in the ether. And this is what makes the spell of smell so tenacious. Perfume always only evokes. It is ever behaving as a tether to other things, a tool of connectivity. Colors, attitude, memory. It's incredible we can bottle that and that we can sell it. Scent is free. Perfume is not free. And there are a million kinds of vanilla. For a solid object and a sold object, perfume is intangible to a shocking degree. This is why it's an excellent gateway to profundity at large. The airspace of our interrogation is limitless, and the presence of some answers in no way suggests the absence of many further questions. Moving toward achievement of this awareness is fundamentally what it means to live a more fragrant life. Recognize that you are already having so many daily thoughts and feelings about the smells that you encounter, and often that you make an action plan that are based on those. Now let's get funky. Okay, Erica, welcome. I am glad that you have made it out of traffic. You're up.
Hi. Okay, I'm sorry. I really was caught in monster San Francisco traffic. So
No worries, love.
But I'm here now. And so what I did when reading the first two chapters was sort of take notes on things that interested me, of course. And what struck me was your comparisons to perfume and surrealism, and also how fragrance is kind of like a puzzle, as is language, and being a poet, that really made me want to do something kind of along those lines for my response. So I'm going to read a little bit from your text, and then I'll read my long poem, which is my response. Perfume is a colorless green idea that sleeps furiously. In 1957, Noam Chomsky noticed that a sentence conveying utter nonsense can remain grammatically correct. His example, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. What a gorgeous sentence. Our lived experience of green or sleep cannot quite align with our ostensibly objective definition of those words. According to this transformational theory of grammar, surrealism is alive and well. Paradoxical things are imbued with vitality, not in spite of our language rules, but because of the very verve of them. Perfume has always seemed to me to be exactly this type of oddity. Our brains do a magic trick with smells that is much like the one they do with words. In the jumble of nouns and adjectives and other parts of speech, our brain looks for patterns in word order that help to build a meaning. Sometimes a very classic and rigidly comprehensible structure, like Chomsky's example sentence, turns out to generate the wildest bit of pure poetry. So what I did was take some of the language from the first two chapters, the second chapter being about literature. And some key lines that kind of hit me. And I fed them over and over and over into like a line generator, and wrote a piece using some of what I got back from the line generator and some of your language from the first two chapters, and made my own sort of language puzzle. So yeah, here's the poem. Perfume is a colorless green idea that sleeps furiously. Perfume is a colorless green idea that sleeps furiously. In a nesting doll hosting choices, life-sized, man-sized, the musk more shallow, with our measly 400 receptors. People are led in blindfolded to report that it smells wonderfully fresh and clean. Smell science, so fresh and so clean. I saw the big wash of my generation destroyed. I saw the fake toiletries of my generation destroyed. Phantosmia, hallucinating ghost scents. Literal poop and social isolation can radically reduce one's quality of life by limiting feelings of belonging. Now is a good time to say that this was written entirely during the COVID-19 pandemic. Droplets, aerosols, the lack of borders or privacy in our airspace, field trips to the fragrance counters. I saw the deep secretion of my generation destroyed, how I mourned the musk. Down, down, down into the darkness of musk. I ended up with a bad migraine that cost me. I ate a lavish home-cooked meal. All I can say is that most of the food was warm, the late, the unsounded, the wakeless, an antidote to my fear. So much do we take our sense of smell for granted. It can be challenging to work up empathy for those who suffer. Gently it goes, the wakeless, the inscrutable, the unfathomed, the soft, the woolly-headed. It takes a village to weave together some semblance of compassion. I cannot help but stop and look at the yellow shampoo, the relationship between chocolate and vanilla. Chocolate is living the paradox of being made mostly of vanilla. We are what we smell. I saw the willy, gustatory perception of my generation destroyed, how I mourned the flavor. Perfume sits midway along the spectrum, between a cup of tea and a cocktail. Sharks can smell their food underwater. Bears can smell fear. Don't wear it on a hunt because it spooks the deer. Cologne is dead. How could these worms have come out of our skin, on a person or into a bottle or through the air? Gently it goes, the colored, the chromatic, the lilac. A flavor is unreasonable. A flavor is a fool. Pay attention to the pastil, the lavender lozenge of my generation destroyed. Perfume always goes to character. There is apparently no end to the number of ways One can say a man smells both clean and like the woods. I saw the light language of my generation destroyed. It is better to be feared than loved. How I mourned the conversation. The word is green beyond belief. Gently it goes. The unaged, the unseasoned, chromatic. I cannot help but stop and look at the light. There are heroes working in the field of scent. How happy are the fake cosmetics? Do the cosmetics sometimes make you shiver? How I mourned the shampoo. How I mourned the cosmetics. How I mourned the musk. Astuteness is its own burden. Are you upset by how pale it is? Humanity is at present like heavy drops of rain, the lightning that waits beyond. Lightning is reported to smell like burning wires or plastic, chlorine or cleaning fluid, inorganic materials. These pale imitations of actual life. Happiness should smell of the earth. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I have been fed through a machine and cut into tiny pieces and mashed up with Allen Ginsberg, and I could not be happier about life. Thank you so much. Thank you so, so much.
You're
Wow.
welcome.
Okay. Erica, one down. Matt, you're up.
Erica, that was so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all, I'm going to share my screen for some images that will accompany the text that I'm reading tonight. I'll go to full screen. So the response that I've concocted is called Location, Vestigial Perfume Traces, Poetic Technologies of Selfhood. In Megan Volpert's book, she dedicates 2 chapters to space and time, and along these interstices, she locates materials, methodologies, histories, and fashions around perfumery throughout history and up into an autobiographical present. From the various crops of vetiver grown internationally to her quest to find a fragrance that captures the scent of the sweet olive that grows in southern Louisiana, Megan calls attention to a kind of terroir. Not only the effects of the mineral qualities of soil on the botanical perfumery materials that are grown there, but also suggestive of the psychological valences by which individuals, subcultures, and discrete populations are positioned within a globalized cultural economy, fraught with the scars of colonialism and a present-day xenophobia that acts itself out at a variety of scales, from immigration crackdowns to the so-called scent-free workplace movement. To wit, from Megan, the geography of any given subculture orchestrates a foundational scent palette for that group's perspective. The key is its location and the soil in which it's grown. The scent of lipstick, of lotion, of shampoo also comes from somewhere else. Prompted by Megan's heartfelt research, I want to excavate something of the somewhere else I come from. Chapter 3 in the book ends off with a tantalizing invitation, a somewhere else that produces the scent of lipstick. Perfumes that smell like lipstick and other cosmetics are a long-held preoccupation of simulacra in my art, writing, and personal tastes. Through a collage of written fragments tonight, I'll aim to piece together a kind of geolocation that articulates my position within not only a discourse of perfumery, but also of gender, queerness, and embodiment. Arabella Sicardi notes in her 2018 essay, A History of Lipstick as Warfare, lipstick has been the glue for feminine tragedy for centuries. To consider the attraction of lipstick, its feel, coloring, and fragrance, is to contend with a population of ghostly remembrances that traverses fashion and beauty rituals, sure, but also the shifting grounds of law and even national character, given its long associations with female empowerment, oral sexual fantasies, deceit, prostitution, and woozy self-care feminism. Unstable and contradictory, like all of my favorite free-floating signifiers, I would say that lipstick is synonymous with women's rage, and that is a kind of rage that is inside of me too. Just as Hélène Cixous and Catherine Clément argue that so-called hysteria is jouissance forced into the oppression of capitalism, in its composure and its put-togetherness, formalism, fashion, idealization, luxury, impassivity, sealant, finishing touch, this is a material gesture that signals flushed faces and feelings, belied, repressed, looming frustration. Hysteria is jouissance, elegance is violence, lipstick is female fury. And to approach a somewhere else that produces its smell, there's a general consensus around which notes meld into that instantly recognizable scent of a waxy tube of lipstick: iris, violet, and rose. Iris brings a soft, sophisticated chew to these scents. Historically used to soften the atmosphere of the boudoir and vanity, it is the root of the iris, called orris, that produces its particular powdery fragrance. Flowers are one of the love languages that my father gave me. I have a collection of vases from the arrangements he sent me over the 15 years we lived apart. Growing up, our yard held roses, lilies, a fig tree, and irises. I've been obsessed with irises. In my memories of youth, the irises in our yards were hardy and aggressive. They refused to stay only where planted. New stalks would grow up through the grass as if they might overtake the place around them. This is not a metaphor. I'm not interested in that kind of cleverness. I am desolated. My sadness is endless, and in my mind, I am watching the creeping excesses of those irises, their purple-blue hearts, how they gather and wander, how they grow beyond the prescribed borders. And in my mind, this is where I choose to revisit my father. Of this trio, violet can be the most challenging for some noses. Its powerful, cool structure often gets entangled in personal baggage around soap or so-called old-fashioned fragrances. Violets have been associated with lesbian love since the 6th century, thanks to the work of the Greek poet Sappho from the Isle of Lesbos. Much of her poetry centered around the relationships and love between women, who she often described as wearing wreaths of violets as crowns or necklaces. Violets, as a signal of lesbian love, rose again in the 1920s when sprigs of violets became the de rigueur indicator of a woman's love for other women. Rose signals as one of perfumery's most romantic symbols: clean, soft, rich, and lemony. It's a very full component when added to blends. When I was a child, my parents brought my twin sibling and me to Sam's Club, which was their preferred discount big box superstore. That year, the store was offering rose bushes that were sold in soil in a cardboard sleeve so that a hole would be dug and the whole container eased down into it and planted, box and all. I selected a rose named Angel Face. She was luminous. Lacy frills tinted with glowing lavender and blush pink striations. Most of all, Angel Face smelled glorious, tenderly sweet with lightly plum and peach nuances, candied, all drawn down to hushed giggles. I imprinted on that little bush. The story isn't an especially happy one. While other rose and box stunts for non-gardeners were thriving around the yard, Angel Face was shown to have a delicate, practically Victorian constitution. Always in some ailment or state of undoing, it was a special agony watching so graceful an icy pale violet being recede from life. We did what we could, but Angel Face did not live out the season. It's not as if I didn't get on with my life, but this memory of a loved one robbed of life produced an iteration of that fundamental wound of object loss that we all more or less navigate at some point. Combined in any number of ways, iris, violet, and rose mark out a place where popular imagination and playing with makeup thrive. This rich lipstick quality produces instant, if not also unsteady joy, the most profound sort of novelty. The emotional reassurances of cheap lipstick worn by my matriarchs or shoplifted from department stores during our teenage years. The middle-class drugstore Revlon lipstick my mom would reapply in the rearview mirror of her Suburban before going into work or church. A kind of melted wax crayon scent that some frag connoisseurs are loath to encounter. Smudgy and whispery, its coquettish resignation tempered with the slouchy, improvised jurisprudence of faking good manners. Most of the lipstick perfume canon is redolent of childhood for a certain class and fantastical of a life very different from what many of us knew growing up, but perhaps observed in the marketing and window displays of department stores. And in the simultaneity and contrasts of these class signifiers, I learned that high-low provocations are always part of camp and queerness. I would walk through shopping malls and sense a mystical shift in atmosphere when passing through beauty sections of department stores or makeup aisles in smaller boutiques. Buttery, soft, rippling sensations around me. It's a scent as crystalline as the crisp taffetas portrayed in Watteau paintings. It's a cherry befitting Clara Bow's pursed lips. A pedophore that smuggles in a very fuzzy, dusty peach without naming it outright. A little bit of puffed rice and an almost Orris pantomime. A riddle that plucks just a few blossoms out of Cacharel's Lulu. Its galbanum tends towards sheer muskiness, only winking at the ingredient's capacity for greenness at the start, and gently graduating towards a bracing quality that holds its own against the coumarin base. To this traditional trinity of femininity, the pop culture of the 1980s added to my developing aesthetics the comforting smells of plastic, rubber, putty, wax, and plasticine, mass-produced toys, dolls, arts, and crafts, high artifice ranging into camp, artificial strawberry, artificial raspberry, artificially sweetened colas, and the salty marzipan asides of Play-Doh and similar modeling clays. My Little Pony, Strawberry Shortcake, Barbie, Little Miss Makeup Doll, Rainbow Bright, and a cotillion of other outrageously femme, quasi-drag gender performances processioned through department stores and shopping malls. The 1980s weren't only a time of living large for the youth set. Excess and exuberance led to prohibition, which led to further transgression. Notoriously, perfume profiles got so huge, big bouquets with nuclear missile range, that high-end restaurants began posting forbidden fragrances on their front doors. This is also the decade when AIDS emerged as a full-blown worldwide epidemic. While perfumes became louder, silence from governments and world leaders who refused to address the spread of AIDS became likewise deafening, and in the meantime, a generation of queers and their associates was utterly decimated. I was born in 1985, and that same year, Reagan finally mentioned AIDS offhandedly in a response to a question during a press conference. Into the fray of 80s boom decadence and AIDS decay, the sillage monster Poison was released by Dior, a fashion house named after a designer who remained closeted throughout his life. In 1991, Magic Johnson announced he was HIV positive. In the same year, Freddie Mercury died of AIDS-related causes, and in his departure, mounting outrage and anxieties in queer, POC, and impoverished communities rushed further into the public eye as the lives of celebrities were impacted by the disease. In 1992, Terry Mugler releases Game Changer Angel, which marks an advent in the gourmand genre while holding the attention of consumers for decades with its undertow of appealing rot. Angel tracked across all sorts of demographics and came to be simultaneously associated with powerful businesswomen, politicians, including Hillary Clinton, exotic dancers, and adolescent girls. In 1994, AIDS becomes the leading cause of death for all Americans ages 25 to 44. In that same year, Calvin Klein released CK1, which signaled a rise in the popularity of extremely clean smelling scents that can be taken as accentuating widespread concerns about infection and health. Shower fresh, vibrant, and simplistic by comparison to the enormity of floral scents from the previous decade, a new premium was placed on the kind of healthful associations consumers made to watery, green, and citrus notes that were common in cleaning products from the era. I smell a body before and after I see it and touch it. Pheromonal trails and fragrant traces remark on a self, signal excessively beyond rigid taxonomies, and most of all, involuntarily disclose and complicate the claims and presumed positions of the one I smell. I smell fear and violence and longing. I smell erotic power, such as how Audre Lorde characterizes it, tamped down, mistrusted, and disempowered. I smell iris, ylang-ylang, cedar, vetiver, purple ginger, rhubarb, black pepper. I smell sugar icing and powder. I smell armpit funk, secret homosexuality, anxiety, and ash. I smell a complicated, oft-reset attempt at innocence and ethics. The framework is compromised by this fugitive, exacting excess. It is powerfully erotic, not just in its atomization, its elegant, holistic dispersal, but also in its collection, the absent body it manifests at intimately close range. I think about possible corollaries for these disclosing signals within abstract bodies, the institutional body, the governmental body, the corporate entity. They are comprised of utilized physical bodies, their staff members, social actors, and in strange but increasingly commonplace cases, they are afforded the functionality of an individual subject. Can I attribute some nascent particulars to an encounter with the abstract social body? What kind of knowing is possible when the infrastructure exudes a faggy floral fragrance that tells you it is coming and where it has been? How might the smell of the institution disclose its motives, stated and ulterior, and its methodologies? At the very least, there's a shift in the power dynamic between the system and the interlocutor. More from Megan. Then there is the idea that perfume is air pollution. Personally, I like perfume that possesses a tremendous blast radius, something with a sillage that takes up an entire meter or airspace around my body and an eternal longevity that still lingers after 8 hours in the heat of life. People sometimes know I've recently been in a room. People sometimes inhale my presence before they apprehend me with their eyes or ears. I project my barbaric yelp into the atmosphere of our mutual existence. It is transcendental, this creeping of my molecules into the zone of your molecules, barely consensual and totally inevitable because breathing is autonomic. We breathe without paying attention. We take molecules in and expel other molecules all without thinking. Perfume is an invasive thing. It colonizes the air, politicizes territories of oxygen. Quote. And yet, quote, in the West, the primary impulses has been to deodorize. Emphasis is placed on masking bodily odors out of fear of being embarrassing or disgusting, creating a mission where the language is focused on the eradicator. A shared public space that still clings to some mythic notions of individual olfactory privacy, eventually wielded as xenophobic stereotypes. Imagery surrounding perfume is often borrowed from conquest and warfare. I could see in his expression that he was undergoing some kind of pointed emotional terrorism. And the first thing that popped into my mind was how Cleopatra is supposed to have perfumed the sails of her ship. This is a brutal and intoxicating display of power, so shocking it would transfix memory instantly. One might imagine that the counterpoint to these anxieties cooked into the culture would be really dirty perfumes with notes of mud and clay, piss and ash. But alongside those confrontations, I also want to venture this evening into proposing that this is precisely the somewhere from which the smell of lipstick issues. Or in other words, the feminine is and always has been the cultural discrepancy within patriarchy and its efficient form of capitalism. Femininity and those femmes and effeminates attached to it are the truly dangerous scourges. Baudrillard writes that the feminine contradicts the binary opposition of the sexes as they have been conceived in the symbolic world order. Like betraying stains on white collars, we always exceed. And this profile of perfume notes swells those transgressions into further excess still. Lipstick as resistant femininity par excellence lays velvety across the edges of language's impact. It makes a case for an art wherein the deepest meaning resides only on the surface of things. The lipstick effect is not only an indicator for economic turbulence, but also a harbinger of something small and deadly, held in her, my hand, pocket, purse, pocketbook. This is a cosmetic work of wonder, a tautology of floral makeup virtual reality, a shimmering fairy figment of the heavily made up courtesan implied by its notes. Its application opens a mouth on your neck, and then another appears on your wrist. Plump lips, secretive grins, a hint of uneven teeth, pearly and gray, sweet breath, soft chill of exhalation. This lipstick is a magic wand, a pickpocket in the throats of curious men. Now gather folds of suede and almond traces. Ginger slinks through. There's extra mouths, painted for the goddesses, open slightly, as if to comment and then quiet themselves. Lilies snatched from Jean Genet's Our Lady of the Flowers keep the rest of these unruly, alluring notes company. You'd better hasten to the hotel bar and get to work. You have a lot of mouths to feed. That's
Oh my
me.
goodness. Oh my goodness, Matt. You are a genius. I feel so seen and understood by that, even though I have not worn lipstick since I was 12. Oh, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. Kate on technology and performance.
Hello, hello, hello. Oh my God, Matt, that was incredible. I really, really loved every moment of that, and the visual aids just, anyway, I could go on and on. The two chapters that I was tasked with that Megan gave me to look at were technology and performance. And if I were going to give these two chapters a subtitle, I would give technology, medicine, and marriage. And I'm going to leave it with that tantalizing preview. And I would give performance, gender, and art. Both of these chapters do the thing that I think Megan does so well as a writer, which is that they weave so many different narratives and bring new information up in a way that feels so organic. I would never have imagined that I could read a chapter about the punk scene and performance art and oh God, what else happens in that chapter? And gardens, all in the same chapter, but Megan does it somehow. So my game plan for my portion of this evening is I'm going to read to you a little bit from the technology chapter. Then I'm going to read you a poem, and then I have a question for Megan because I like to interrogate her. It's a pastime of mine. The part of technology that I'm going to read you comes kind of early on. Like I said, this chapter has a lot to do with marriage. And as Megan is describing the perfume of her marriage, she gets into a little bit of the science of orange blossom scent extraction. So that's what I'm going to read to you about. One method of getting fragrance from orange blossoms is solvent extraction. The flower petals are washed and macerated in a solvent like hexane. This alcohol strips the flower of its smelly molecules, along with some waxy substances and plant matter, resulting in a concrete. This lump is then washed with another solvent like ethyl alcohol until only the highly concentrated and deeply fragrant oil is left behind, which is called orange blossom absolute. A tiny few drops of absolute go into a perfume bottle, along with some water and a lot of body-safe alcohol. It takes 1,000 kilograms of flour to make just 1 kilogram of orange blossom absolute. 1 milliliter of this pure juice is worth between $20 and $30. The second method, which is somewhat less expensive, is to distill orange blossoms in boiling water and collect the fragrant steam. In the pool of condensation, the flower's essence floats to the top of the remaining water, and this collected oil is called neroli rather than orange blossom. The distillation method results in a much greener and therefore fresher scent than the solvent extrication method, and 1 kilogram of neroli can be had out of just 850 kilograms of the flower. This begs the Levi-Straussian question of cooked versus raw. asking how technology adulterates our experience of perfume's natural ingredients. Just as varying body temperature causes a perfume to behave differently across a diversity of skins, varying intensity of heat application causes the flower's essence to behave differently across a diversity of extraction methods. Distillation by water is a less harsh and more natural approach than scrubbing a flower with alcohol that also occurs at a higher temperature. If a perfume's authenticity centers on how close it comes to the experience of sticking one's nose in the flower, Orange Blossom Absolute is more authentic than neroli oil. On the other hand, neroli oil may be closer to the experience of getting a whiff of the entire tree. One generally thinks of essential oils as quite natural because of the purity of their single ingredient, but even essential oils are not raw. Technology is always already in operation in the cornucopia of highly sophisticated and precisely calibrated techniques for pulling fragrances out of the world and putting them into a bottle. A perfume is, by definition, a cooked object. There is a necessarily civilized component to it, even in just thinking about the connection between perfume and fire. The best smelling cave dweller was certainly the one who tended whatever was roasting on the prehistoric barbecue. In our house, I do the cooking. And I'll leave you there to come read the rest for yourself. Another idea that I felt like was ghosting around these two chapters, technology and performance, was the idea of capitalism, of commodification, and owning fragrance. As a poet, I have lately really been interested in Pantone, in the idea of owning colors. And I've written this series of poems that try to recreate these trademarked scents. So in a similar vein, I've written a poem a little bit like that about the fragrance that I'm wearing today, which is Le Labo Santal 33. So I'm going to read that for y'all. Le Labo Santal 33. Greenwood cut with a pocket knife or a cantaloupe split. The inhale on American spirits, light blue, and shaggy campgrass on a lawn in rural Arkansas. Amber gemstone set in silver, Birkenstocks fresh from cardboard and brown paper. This is early spring swearing towards sunshine, a rocks glass after bourbon, girl sweat dried by cool night air. So that's my poetic interpretation of Santal 33. Megan, you wanna pop in so I can ask you some questions?
Fully popped.
Woo! So the first question I had for you is about ownership. And I feel like you touch on this idea in both of these chapters. And the first question I had for you was, what are your thoughts on the kind of recent dupe companies like Dossier and Alt that recreate those extremely expensive designer scents at a lower price point?
I have purchased 3 things from Alt. I gave them really positive reviews, and in one I did hashtag the name of the original fragrance, and like 6 weeks after I posted my review that was favorable to the dupe, the original company had my post taken down from Instagram. And I was like, what poor intern do you have combing the web for like dupe reviews of have you nothing better to do? And no, you don't, because people pay $500 a bottle for your shit, when in fact I paid $35 for something that smells so goddamn similar that I cannot tell the difference between them. So there. That's a baseline, I guess, for what I would. The 3 fragrances in particular that I have tried from Alt are the one that resembles Tom Ford's Black Orchid. That one is only so-so, but I don't like the original fragrance that much either. I just know it very well, and so I wanted to compare, and it does pretty much stack up, I gotta say. I also have a version of Creed Green Irish Tweed which is astronomically priced. I've had small, tiny sample vials of the real deal, which is lovely, but I cannot afford it. And I get compliments on the alt version all the time. And then the last one is the famed dupe of Baccarat Rouge, which everyone loves and almost everyone knows. And if you don't, you should, but don't buy the original, buy the dupe, which is much cheaper. And I mean, it just smells like pineapple fruit punch, like the world's most beautiful pineapple fruit punch. So I guess I've lost sight of your question, but I'm in favor of, make copies of things. I'm of the Warholian late neoliberal capitalist variety. I definitely think that you can, it's funny to put the Mona Lisa on a coffee mug. It's not the same, but it is the same. It's same, but different. And, do we live in the postmodern era or not? I think it's fine. I think it's fine to work with whatever budget you got.
I love that. Okay. So more on ownership. I want to know, do you have a signature scent, and like, how do you think people, like, how does one acquire a signature scent? What are your thoughts on signature scents?
I think people would say that I had a signature scent. I wore Bath and Body Works Warm Vanilla Sugar for very many years in college and in graduate school. And I was kind of like known for that. I remember one time somebody else in my writing program was doing like a little documentary and was asking about different people in the program, different stuff. And someone said, like, what do you think of Megan Volpert? And the respondent said, she always smells like fresh baked cookies. And I was like, awesome. But yeah, there's a long essay in the book about what I used warm vanilla sugar for. So I won't go into detail on that, but it was a way to cope with the need to harden myself to the forces of the universe and simultaneously keep some soft air. So it definitely was aromatherapy for me at a time in my life where things were pretty tough. How does one find a signature fragrance? I mean, it just has to call out to you, right? Just like you find your profession in life. I feel like a signature fragrance you have to smell it on somebody else and like want it on them, and then realize you really want it for you. The way sometimes we crush on actors or actresses in movies and then we realize we just want to be them. We don't want to even meet them. We just want to have what they have, or some element of them wants to be combinant with some element of us. So I mean, there was a time in my life where I definitely would have had a signature fragrance, but now I have this vast perfume library, and nothing brings me joy more than changing my fragrance like 3 times a day, bare minimum. There's that.
I love that. And as a fellow warm vanilla sugar Libra, I am fully with you. I loved the cucumber melon, but I didn't want to wear cucumber melon. I just wanted to love cucumber melon girls. That is my queer girl truth. My last question, more of a request, and it might take you a minute. Maybe this is an end of the event request, but I would love to see your Fragrantica library. I don't know if you do the thing where you put things on your shelf of like to sample or like own, love, hate. But if you can screen share and show us what your Fragrantica shelf looks like, I would be delighted.
Yeah, I don't really classify them, but I do, I keep my perfume table. My wife is a clothes horse, and so she has an entire room in our house that is her walk-in closet, and in the dead center of the room is my perfume table, where I have the whole top is covered with like whatever I'm into for the week or the month, and then like in it is where I store everything else. So I don't really them or like move. I don't use the space to position them according to like favorite or not favorite. I generally work more like by genre and ingredients for the most part, and also sometimes by bottle shape and size or by brand. But I do regularly post photos of the top of my perfume table and what I'm working on Instagram. I should do like a more monthly or weekly post about that. I will consider that a long-term project, Kate.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. I am done. I passed the torch.
Thank you so much. Last but certainly not least, covering the self and the other for us, we have Arielle.
Hi. This has been so fun to listen to and be a part of, and I had many of the same thoughts and reflections of many of you, as you will see. So thank you, Megan, for inviting me to be here, and to the Georgia Center of the Book, and Erica and Matt and Kate for your words tonight. So I'm talking about self and other. In the chapter called Self, Megan explores the concept of the signature scent via her first Bath & Body Works Warm Vanilla Sugar. She writes, and in my excerpts here, I've had to tragically cut out a few things for the sake of time, so I'm gonna skip around a little bit, but I think it'll work out. Warm Vanilla Sugar is one of Bath & Body Works' true classics and will likely never be retired, though the formula shifts from time to time. An oriental vanilla with some brown sugar on top, a little coconut and rice powder in the middle, generic musks and a gentle sandalwood at the base. Just a basic beige color, unassuming but an iconic vanilla with a tremendous staying power. With Warm Vanilla Sugar, I began to apply the ideas of a scent and to better understand myself as a result. Already by age 15, I was a profoundly wounded person, cut down by poverty, by the failures of my parents and the impotence of their rages, by the politics of the Reagan era that I was born into, by a world that wants to take everything from a girl, by social isolation and the consequence-laden oppression of my fledgling queerness. The things that steadied me were band books, punk rock, the debate team, and the unerring conviction that someday my giftedness would set me free. My open mouth was knife edge. My attitude oozed from every pore. And on top of this, I swam in a cloud of warm vanilla sugar. This was a scent that was so sweet and so welcoming, so much a snuggly teddy bear that it stood in clear contrast to all the visual and verbal signaling that I was a big, bad monster. It lulled people into a false sense of security before the tongue lashing, advertising my innocence that was then revoked with any word I uttered. It centered, warmed, and comforted me so that I could focus on staying alive. It lingered in a room long after I departed, catching everyone in my wide blast radius. It announced me. It was persistent. It left people surprised or confused by the mixed messaging. Warm Vanilla Sugar was camouflage and armor at once. It was my business card, my trademark. In the chapter called Other, Megan describes how she arrived at her mother-in-law Ellen's 75th birthday present, a bottle of Etro's Shantung. Ellen is known by our family to wear a perfume of roses. If pressed, they might specify that it's a tea rose. In the garden, tea roses are known for being high maintenance, so they didn't have much in common with my mother-in-law. Ellen is classically sturdy and stoic. She worked as an accounts payable clerk for a Long Island school district while keeping a firm grip on the household management of 3 kids and a boisterous husband. Photos reveal her keen fashion sense evolving across several decades, remaining both trendy and professional. Even her hairdo always rolled with the times. Yet across the span of 50 years, Ellen is alleged to have worn only this single fragrance of roses. Naturally, I began digging. The first discovery was that she wears a perfume oil roll-on, Rose Winds by Common Sense. It's described as a single note scent that is fresh and romantic, but it's marked neither as pure essential oil nor as a fragrance blend that is exclusive to Common Sense. 30 milliliters of it costs $35.50, which is a bit much for an oil of such vague provenance, yet extremely thrifty as far as how long a single bottle will last. And if she likes the way it smells on her, who cares about all the rest? Ellen actually uses 2 rose scents, the other being Tea Rose by Perfumers Workshop. This is an iconic fragrance, launched in 1977 and sold on the image of Princess Diana, Catherine Deneuve, and Grace Kelly, among other fabulous women. Like my mother-in-law, they are arguably all blondes. Tea Rose has sold over 50 million bottles by now and is widely considered a classic. As a trendy thing that became timeless, as an image of womanhood that was strong yet respectable in the eyes of the mainstream, this fragrance very much fits with Ellen. So it seems that Ellen made up her mind about perfume in the middle of the 70s, based primarily on those unsought influences that would have landed directly in her lap, filtered through her sensibilities of simplicity and thriftiness. In all, she had a sense of perfume that was not based on any idea of luxuriousness, nor did she pick up an interest in it as part of the fashion culture to which she was otherwise much attuned. Yet her choices are clearly an expression of self and a certain notion of serviceability, that if her fragrance isn't broken, there's no need to go out and experiment with fixes to it. She is a person who researches things and asks questions, not a person who follows whims or even one who much enjoys experimenting for adventure's sake. She's open to new things, but usually doesn't seek them. For the seeking, she enjoys relying on me and my wife, and we do our best to deliver. This brings us to Etro's Shantung, which my wife and I gifted Ellen for her 75th birthday. Shantung silk is named for Shandong, its provenance of origin, whose name can be literally translated as east of the mountains. The work of producing this silk required focused attentiveness and a good deal of patience. It was not so much a repetitive task as a ritualized one. A ritual is a practice that indeed repeats, but it does so with careful regard for connectedness. As ritual, silk production is not unlike Ellen's household management, to the extent that it relies on a strong foundation of shared values in order to be successful over the long term. Etro's Shantung perfume is meant to capture some sense of this fabric that my mother-in-law doesn't actually wear, and as a gift, determined with deep attentiveness and connectivity, it materially represents a most high respect for Ellen. Hi, Ellen. I'm so glad to see that you're here. I loved reading about you. In these two chapters, Megan takes us from vanilla to roses, from late childhood to a landmark of late adulthood. And I found myself struck by the contrast between the girlish need to hide in scent and the very adult-seeming power of having a scent found for you on the basis of the solidity of your character. I myself have long struggled with the solid notion of self that a signature scent seems to require. The reading of this book brought back to me a strong scent memory of a woman on my high school gymnastics team who slathered Victoria's Secret Pear Glacé all over her body, at least twice a day. It's a lotion. Her name was Michelle. When I entered our locker room before practice, I would know if Michelle had arrived, just as I would know if she were at a party when I opened the door. If she missed a meet, the bus ride was melancholy, all sneakers and the sickly rot of spilled sugary drink, no pear glacé. Megan writes, and Matt read this section too, but it's short, I'm going to read it again, that she likes perfume that possesses a tremendous blast radius, that takes up an entire meter of airspace around my body, and an eternal longevity that still lingers after 8 hours in the heat of life. People sometimes know I've recently been in the room. People sometimes inhale my presence before they apprehend me with their eyes or ears. I project my barbaric yop into the atmosphere of our mutual existence. I like thinking about Megan and Michelle and Walt Whitman all together. Michelle first introduced me to this singular power of a signature scent. It was a way of making others experience her as larger than her discrete body. It let her linger like a good parting quip or a lipstick print on the glass. And though I adored the smell of pear glacé, I never had the slightest desire to procure a bottle for myself. Never mind that it was one of the most popular fragrances of the decade. It belonged to Michelle. Pear glacé was her, and she it. So I wonder, to what extent is the signature scent expected to be a distillation of self? In an earlier chapter, Megan somewhat dismisses the 1985 novel Perfume by Patrick Suskind, which is totally fair. But I often think of that novel as a powerful description of how misogyny works, reducing the entirety of a female person's identity to some pleasant whiff. I wonder, would warm vanilla sugar have worked on Megan if she indeed was always nice and sweet? The dissonance seems to be what made it expressive. Megan writes that after warm vanilla sugar, she never had another signature scent because she moved towards a more complex relationship with smell. This is Megan. As one's fragrance interest levels up on Bloom's pyramid, one hops from bottle to bottle, exercising the faculties of analysis and evaluation with ever quicker and greater precision. When smelling in 3 dimensions, one truly enters into the scent matrix. One thinks at the level of a molecule, but less quantitatively than that, discerning the depth and mood of smells. So Love's Lemon is not only yellow, it is solar, cold, and upbeat. I love that. And I found it helpful because I'd long assumed that my own failure to commit to a signature scent was because of a perceived inability to imagine the perfect scent that would capture all of me, a sort of lack of complexity. I thought having one scent I wore every day would be like writing the words of a single letter that would announce my every visit and bid my long farewells. Such a task would be impossible because I've always had more than just one thing to say. But after reading Megan's perfume, I've realized that perhaps scent itself can be a signature. One might leave a different message every time, a trail of changing moods and measures, new desires, and nostalgic concepts. The description of the process of buying a perfume for Ellen almost reads like engineering a person in reverse, what someone's dream of themselves would smell like. And the experiment is a wild success. Megan concludes the chapter by writing, Ellen cherishes this bottle of perfume we got her, perhaps for some of the reasons I've traced here, and probably for some more reasons that are entirely her own. This particular gift of the sniff transformed us into true friends who deeply understand each other in ways we were previously unable to communicate by any other means. After I closed the book, I wondered if Shantung had become Ellen's signature. It is, as Megan writes, luxurious but not overpriced, exactly where I imagine most of us would like to land at 75. And I wouldn't fault Ellen for choosing to keep sending a message written in response to her life, a benediction of all the roses she had already worn. There is a part of me that hopes that it is. Lately, I have been wearing the same scent over and over. Don't ask me what it is because I can't commit to saying, and I can't call it a signature yet, or maybe ever. I am reliably pleased, however, when I wear a sweater for the second time in a week and I catch a whiff on the collar. But it still lacks that fleeting note of decisiveness. What really makes the signature scent in the end, it seems to me, is that you decide. Thank you.
Yes, that is it. I mean, you have to wear the fragrance. The fragrance should not be wearing you. It's harder to find the dividing line there than it, like if you see a person on the street that's just frumpy and small inside their clothes, then you're like, oh, those are wearing you. Good try though. I see you're working on something there, you know. Fragrance is a little harder to tell whether you're wearing it or it's wearing you, but you'll get it. I want to privately consult with you on this. Allow me to psychoanalyze you to the same extent that you have just so graciously psychoanalyzed me.
I was like my fantasy the whole time of reading it. That the whole story of how you arrive at the scent for Ellen, I thought was like one of the most moving tributes of love I had read in a really long time. And it was just,
oh, thank you. That was actually the first chapter that I wrote for the book. The last chapter on the getting the perfume for Ellen was the first thing I wrote. And it was because we literally were on deadline to get the present for Ellen for her birthday. And I was like, well, I mean, let's get her a bottle of perfume. So once Mindy approved my mission, then I was like, and also I'm going to write about this. And so it's going to be a book chapter. And so now also she has a book chapter for a present, but she couldn't show it to anybody or tell anyone about it, because I had agreed to not publish anything or like say anything about what I was working on while I was working on it. So she kept it to herself. She kept it to herself all this time. And this week, finally, the world gets to see the gift that I gave to her. Okay, so we have Q&A time now, right, Joe?
Yeah, let's go ahead and open it up to questions. So if you have a question for any of our guests, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. And, I'm just going to go ahead and softball all of you one, sort of like dovetailing on the last reading by Arielle, because I always think of perfumes and scent memories and something that takes you immediately back to a place in time. Like I can tell you that my maternal grandmother wore white shoulders and my paternal grandmother wore Estee Lauder's Aramis. And like immediately I go back to childhood in certain places with it. So for all of you, is there a particular perfume that takes you back to a immediate moment in your life, no matter where you are and you catch a whiff of it?
Absolutely. My grandfather, my last grandparent that is still alive, turned 100 on Monday. And so in honor of his birthday, I wore the fragrance that my grandmother wore for very many years when I was growing up. She passed away a long, long time ago, but she always wore Clinique Aromatics Elixir, which was a very, very popular fragrance for its time. And sort of a little bit of a pioneer too, a little bit of the bleeding edge at the time for how dirty it was in the base note. And yeah, my grandmother wore it. And I actually didn't know at the time when she was alive, she never told me what it was, but I knew she was a big fan of Clinique makeup, which also, I mean, to Matt's point, I have a lot of feelings about the signature smells of Clinique across the board. But yeah, so I wore it for his birthday so that we could have that sort of like bring Lulu in to celebrate Papa's 100th.
My paternal grandmother also wore an Estee Lauder fragrance. I don't know which one it was, but I will tell you that last year, my whole family got together for the first time in a long time. And my dad revealed that he had saved one of her bottles of perfume. And he was like, I have it upstairs in the medicine cabinet right now. And I ran upstairs and I brought it down. And we all like passed it around and smelled it. And we all started crying. It was like so intense, like she was just back in the room. And it's funny because none of us particularly like the smell of this perfume, but it nothing could bring back her presence like so powerfully than smelling that bottle.
I have to say Cody Emerald. You heard of that one?
Indeed.
It's you know what I'm talking about, Megan?
Mm-hmm.
That takes me right back to like being 3 or 4 or 5 and playing on my great aunt's dresser. They have this so Emerald is green and it came in like this gigantic bottle and it smells like carnations and cotton. It's got like a really powdery scent. Someone would call it an old lady perfume, but I remember seeing it on my great aunt's vanity. And every time I smell it, I have it. So I have her bottle that was sitting on her dresser. And every time I smell it, you know, sometimes I'll just open it in the summertime and take a whiff. And it just takes me right back to being like 3 or 4 years old. And it's standing in front of her vanity, looking in her mirror. And also Nocturne. That was my mother's signature scent. So every time I smell Nocturne, it's like I'm with my mom again.
I can definitely smell the influence of that first fragrance in some of the things that you've produced for Little Homie Apothecary that
Really?
I've tried out. I smell it in Green Goddess. I smell it even a little bit in Frances. Yeah. I know you like to pay homage to the ladies of your life, you know, and so I can definitely smell that in some of the work that you do too.
Matt, Kate, what about you all?
It's a great question. I thought of 2 things immediately from different stages of life, of my life. That one is Praline de Santal by Pierre Guillaume, that I bought in Paris, gosh, half a decade ago. And it was our last day, the first time my partner and I had traveled to Paris together, and it was our last day there. And we were walking along a street that translates to the street of the archive. And we were carrying a little box of marshmallows that had been made by a patissier. And I had just bought Praline de Santal, and I don't wear it very often. It's a hazelnut note that goes a little peanut buttery. And so I have to be in a very specific mood for it, but it's utterly transportive as a result. And then my dad wore a number of fragrances before he died, and but the main one I associate to him is Yop pour homme, that you'll have recognized. It's JOOP exclamation point. Yop was this very contradictory men's fragrance in the 80s that was simultaneously like deeply homoerotic and also hyper masculine. Its tagline was "Real men wear pink," and it has a very strong tonka bean note, synthetic tonka bean note. So not only does that scent bring him back, I think whenever I come across those particular aroma chemicals in other contexts as well, they're very stirring.
I love that. Mine's probably the simplest and maybe least interesting, but my granddad, my mom's dad, wore Old Spice. And then my little brother started wearing it. And after he died, I started wearing Old Spice deodorant. So I like the line that carries through. I don't know that it ties to a memory, but I was thinking about it because of the familial lines that y'all are talking about.
Kate, I want to say it's in Barbara Herrmann's Sentence Subversion, but it's in one of these books that we all have. I believe Old Spice, if I remember right, Old Spice was originally formulated to be a women's perfume, and then market testing found that it played better as a men's aftershave. And so that your family would bend it across generations and genders, I think it's super exciting.
I love that. That's so cool.
I also think an interesting thing about Old Spice is that it doesn't suffer from the types of critiques that fragrances that have been around that long generally suffer from. Like, you know, Chanel No. 5, for example, at the high end, people say like, oh, the formulation from 1988 is so superior to the 1992 formulation. And now you can't even find the 92. And there's eBay wars about it, you know? But like no one goes around grieving that Old Spice smells differently now than it did 30 or 60 or 80 years ago, or however long it's been around, a very long time, you know. It doesn't seem to suffer from complaints about the change in the formula the way nearly every other fragrance that is similarly that old tends to suffer from. So I don't know what the cause of that is, but I mean, maybe because it's for men that like men don't grieve about the change in their, I don't know. It's interesting to think about. We have a chat box question.
You do.
Sorry.
I'm gonna go right ahead, Erica.
I was just saying my husband just started wearing Old Spice deodorant, and I wear it too because of him.
Okay.
So good and easy.
It is the superior deodorant. I also do love that it has truly been co-opted by the lesbian community as like a thing, which is kind of part of also why I got into it.
Oh yeah. I'll personally vouch for the fact that it pairs well with Bandit. Anyway, we have this question from a dear friend of mine, Randy Oxier, professor of philosophy and communications at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, would like to know, I am thinking about how people save articles of clothing that still bear the scent, however slight, of what the person smells like without any enhancement. What of the conundrum of what I individually smell like without anything on? Do we sacrifice this, meaning our individual smell, in order to have a choice over our scent? Huh. Well, to me, I mean, you sort of have a choice of what you individually smell like to begin with. Like you decide how often you shower, you decide what you eat, you know, stuff like that, or like what sort of fabric you wear, how breathable it is, how much your sweat is going to stay on your body versus get wicked away. So, I mean, yeah, capitalism wants us to believe that we've abdicated responsibility for whatever we smell like naturally, quote unquote, but I don't even think that's true. Aren't vegans always talking about how they smell better than meat eaters? That's a thing, right?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So, so yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. To me, I'm just like, give me every tool that's in the box and I'll play with them each in turn as I have need or see fit or am amused to.
Can I ask you a follow-up on that, Megan, which is that I remember maybe like 10 years ago, there was this trend of perfume, maybe they still have this, but of perfumes that claimed to like take scientifically proven opposite sex pheromones and incorporate them into their formula. Like, do you know about that? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the fragrance that you're thinking of is called Realm, and there's a few paragraphs devoted to it in one of these chapters. I want to say they're in Kate's chapters, right? On there, I think they're in the technology/medicine chapter. And just, I mean, the deal is that we don't really know what human pheromones are for. There's one study that sort of says like women in college dorms end up with slightly synced up periods because of pheromones. But aside from that, there's like not a lot of data and not a lot of interest in doing more research, at least commercially, not a lot of interest in sussing out pheromonal complexities in humans. Animals use pheromones because they don't have language to the same extent that we have language. You know, they can't just talk to each other the same way we talk to each other. So they give off other messages using their aroma chemicals. But we don't really, I mean, we have pheromones, but there's not really any indication that you can smell mine or I can smell yours in a way that's like either neurologically meaningful or consciously meaningful to any of us. Science.
I was just going to add in response to Randy's question. I did a project a number of years ago called Copycat Killer, where I made sort of crude imitations of the fragrances that my family members wear. And we were all alive at the time. And one of the goals of the fragrances wasn't only to like riff on Red Door by Elizabeth Arden, but to try to capture something about the smell of my mom's body wearing Red Door. And so this ended up being learning a lot about sort of our body's aroma chemistry and ways to synthesize that through musks and things to try to capture not just the smell of the thing that we're wearing, but that sort of specific sort of encoding that gets carried in our bodies in how we interact with the fragrances that we wear.
Yeah. I mean, what smells one way on Matt is going to smell a different way on me because of our different body chemistries. So what's funny is like the flip side of Randy's question then is like, does use of fragrance kind of obliterate our own, whatever we have going on natural. I keep wanting to just like from our bodies, the fragrances that come from our bodies are, you know, they always insert themselves into the stuff we layer on top that we have purchased. You know, you can't, they are going to meld no matter what you do.
But I think, as you were saying, they're totally unstable. They're totally not inherent. They're vestiges of the kind of body as biome.
You know, years ago, we did a event with Chandler Burr for his book, The Perfect Scent, and he chronicled the creation of two scents, one by Selena Lena, and one was Sarah Jessica Parker's scent that she was putting out at that point in time. And her scent, she said that she really liked the smell, one of body odor, but like fresh body odor. Like, you know, as you just start, when you're working out and your body is doing its natural functions, and it's my favorite word ever, petrichor. I love it. You know, so for those of you out there, petrichor, if you don't want to look it up, that's the smell of like concrete or stone after it's been freshly rained upon, and it produces a certain scent. But those were her two that she was trying to replicate in this perfume. And it's so interesting that it's like, we kind of like the smell of natural body scent to a certain extent. You know, it's like she wanted that freshness of it, but not sort of like, you know, high school gym locker room after 10 years kind of body scent.
I'm reading Franklin Abbott's note. Hi, Franklin. I'm reading Franklin Abbott's note in the chat box about his mother. Clinique Happy. My first girlfriend wore Clinique Happy. And so it's imprinted on me. And I have a bottle. I love it. I wear it all the time in the spring and in the summer. It's a really good pick me up. But like I have such an ability to recognize it that for a long while I would just like freak out complete strangers because I would be sitting next to someone in a restaurant and I would just lean over and be like, "You're wearing Clinique Happy," and they would always be like, like I've seen them in their underwear or something, and I'm like, "Well, you made your fragrance publicly available and I recognized it. We can talk about it like two Priuses passing each other on the road and being excited we both drive Priuses. You know, like we can chat about Clinique Happy, or you can be weird about the fact that I smelled you in public, which is the purpose of fragrance." I don't know. It's kind of funny. So my initial forays into having conversations about fragrance with strangers were not very successful. Anyway,
Well,
yes.
Be gift.
What case?
It's yet to be smelled, right?
I think.
Like there's an inherent intimacy to that.
Yeah, but it's also deeply performative, whether you are your own audience or whether the other people in your airspace are your audience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If a fragrance is put on a body and there's no one there to smell it, is it really a perfume? I do not know. But yeah, Franklin doesn't ask a question exactly, but he is, I'm intrigued by his reluctance to use scent because so many people are allergic. Just as he's reluctant to burn incense with his spring and fall allergies. Yeah, that's a concern. My father was one of those. He always would say that he was allergic to fragrance, but he just actually had a very sensitive nose and he didn't enjoy it. And so he would say, you know, like the way I'm reminded of on Friends when Chandler Bing doesn't want to admit that he doesn't like puppies. And so he just is like, I can't be around them. And eventually it's out that he just doesn't like them and people judge him for that. I think a lot of people that say they're allergic to perfume are like kidding themselves or trying to kid the public. I don't know. I have a skepticism about it the same way I have a skepticism about people who say they're intolerant of gluten. Controversial hot take, but there you have it.
I want to go back to you saying that like people are weirded out when you identify their fragrance, and I think that's a funny observation because I think there are so many things that we have undergone really positive cultural shifts about talking about or acknowledging. Like I think there's much more acknowledgement now about the fact that if you're a gender nonconforming person or a person who's differently abled, like you don't want people to say to their children, like, don't look at this person, don't talk about it. You want to encourage a conversation about that because it's part of the like wonderful normalization process that we hope happens for everything. And I feel like one of the things that your book does that's really positive and interesting to me, like it made me realize how often we associate scent with intimacy, especially like personal bodily scent, that the context in which it seems really appropriate to compliment someone on how they smell or to think about how they smell is like a sexualized context. But that's crazy because we're smelling people all the time and everybody knows what everybody else smells like. But it's like this weird taboo thing, I think maybe because of the association with the sexual context where it's like, you're not supposed to talk about what people smell like or how people smell or like, I was thinking about, I did this to my own child the other day that like we walked into a room where someone had clearly farted and he said like, who farted immediately we walked to the room. And I was like, that's not a good like social entry. But then I realized like, why should he not? Like, why are we not allowed to talk about those things? Like whether bad or good, like, I wonder where you think we are in terms of the ability to talk about scent and especially like bodily scent more openly.
I don't know. I was thinking about a positive counterexample that being able to identify the fragrance worn by a stranger won me a book contract once, or won me enough of an audience to do my elevator pitch for a book contract. I'm pleased to say that it was Sibling Rivalry Press, with whom I worked for very many years. The publisher, Brian Borland, I invited him to Atlanta to do a thing. And the first night that we met before the thing, I had smelled that he was wearing Curve for Men by Claiborne. And so the second night that we hung out, which was the night of doing the thing, he was still wearing it and I wore it also because I was going to go and speak to him about this book project. And so I wore the same fragrance as him, you know, and then I showed up and I said, Brian, you are wearing Curve for Men. And he was like, magic. And then he wanted to hear anything that I would say about everything because I was like clairvoyant to him. How did I know out of all the fragrances on all the planet that that's what he had on? And then so I furthermore then said, I am wearing it also. And then he started sniffing around me and was like, you are where I thought it was me that I was smelling, but it's you. Your application is so much stronger than my application. And so he sort of immediately understood who I was based on the quantity of the perfume that I was wearing compared to his quantity. And like within a week, we had that Andy Warhol book on paper, locked down, ready to go. So it hasn't been all bad. It hasn't been only strangers on the train moving to other cars when I try to speak to them. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Most of us are just in our house or in our bubble now, right? So it's a weird time to be trying to speculate on what perfume means in a public space, I think.
So we are at about an hour and 30 minutes into it. And if anybody has any last minute questions or anything like that, I kind of have a fast one to end on if no one else has anything for us, which is going to be money aside. If you could buy any perfume, money is no object, which one would you buy?
This is a really hard question. I guess maybe there are some Serge Lutas fragrances that are only available at the flagship store in Russia. That would be a hard get.
Flight to Russia too.
Yeah,
the plane ticket plus the price of the perfume.
So maybe that, or like maybe a really ancient preparation. My favorite fragrancers are Dior and Guerlain. And so maybe like an original bottle of Habit Rouge, which is my favorite Guerlain fragrance. That would be, I don't even know. I dare not investigate how much it would cost if it could even be found, but surely several $1,000s at least. So maybe that, I don't know. Something antique that's not to be worn, but just you take the cap off and sniff it and see if there's still juice in the bottle every once in a while. Something like that has to be just preserved.
Got it. Matt, Arielle, Kate, Erica.
I have two sort of different responses. One is the very, very legendary Iris Gris by Jacques Foss, one of the early Iris perfumes that has not been in production for a very long time. The Osmotek in Versailles maintains the formula, so you can still smell it if you make an appointment there, but most of the materials that were used originally are either too rare to be used or have been regulated in the decades intervening. And so not only is it wildly expensive, it's almost just impossible to find. And then kind of the other end is that Kim Kardashian West has really built a perfume empire over the last few years, entirely online. And so one of the things that's kind of wild about KKW is that almost all these purchases are being made as blind buys. People are buying mid-range to affordable perfumes without ever having smelled them. Really popular early releases that sold out in the first day or two based purely on her celebrity have often gotten re-released. But in one of her first collections, they released a perfume called Kimoji Peach. And it kind of looks like, the bottle looks kind of like Kim K's ass with like Krispy Kreme icing, like donut icing dripping off of it. And it's considered a pretty nice peach perfume for its price point, but it sold out in like a couple of hours and they've never re-released it. So in my mind, I've just always been very curious about what it would be.
I'm actually really, really curious to smell the original Napoleon scent with the rosemary and lime that you mentioned in your book.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to have a little bit of just like that ancient, original bit of that perfume. So that would be my huge investment.
I don't know a lot about fancy perfumes, but when you said that you loved Dior, I had this flash memory of the fact that my friend's mom wore Dior Hypnotic Poison, and I loved the smell of that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I considered stealing it. I didn't, but I thought about it. And I would love to re-smell that because I don't really remember exactly what it smelled like. But I also feel like after reading that last chapter that I would actually pay quite a bit of money to have Megan pick a perfume for me. Like, I just feel like that experience sounds like tops. And actually, I feel like it solves the signature scent dilemma, which is that like it seems to make more sense to have somebody else determine what your someone who knows you well and knows what your what you like to smell like, and also knows your personality, determine what your signature scent should be, than that you select your own signature scent. I like the idea of that very much.
Well, that's
Yeah,
very in
I'm not
keeping
above a
with-
side hustle.
Do it. I feel like that's where this is all leading, really.
Absolutely. I would also pay like cash money for Megan to pick out my perfume. Also, I love these answers. I had never considered like the inaccessible historic, I guess, because my chapters were more centered on the present and technology. My modest dream for perfume is I own a very, very small sample of Tom Ford Bitter Peach, and I will not pay the like almost $400 price tag for it. I won't do it, but I would love it. My other dream is one time I was in a antique store in New York City, and I saw one of those like basketball sized bottles of perfume. That it was Norel, like huge bottle sitting, and it was like mostly empty, but just like sitting there. And so I like did some research, and apparently people do like buy these like gallon sized bottles of perfume of your signature scent. And Megan, you do this?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I go through a gallon of Frank Sinatra's preferred lavender fragrance a year, easily.
Love
I just
that.
pour it into my shower every morning before I get in, honest to God.
I love that. And I would love to own like a giant gallons. I mostly wear Suntal 33, whatever, call me out, it's cliche. But their giant bottle I think is like $1,000. But it's sexy looking.
Sometimes size does matter. Fragrance is an area where this is a major issue, you know? I mean, you need huge mountains of garbage bags full of rose petals to make a tiny vial of something or other. You know, it's very interesting. Size expands and contracts radically in the field of perfume, just as time kind of becomes meaningless in the field of perfume. I don't know. It's a very interesting way to kind of sensorially restructure your life. That's really the note that we should end on. What I'm saying is, you know, close your eyes for a minute. What I'm saying is stop relying so much on passive senses that don't require a lot of interpretative capabilities. Like everybody's eyes pretty much do the same thing, more or less. It doesn't take a lot of skill to use one's eyes. It takes a great deal of skill and study and mindfulness to use one's nose to navigate through life. And if more people took more time to, you know, not only stop and smell the roses, yes, literally do that, but also just to think about their interactions with scent throughout the day instead of dismissing them and going on to the next. I mean, my life has been made immeasurably better because of this. So, you know, I'm just preaching on it. That's all. Like, pay attention. That's it.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, for this absolutely fantastic conversation with all of your guests, Matt, Arielle, Kate, and Erica. Don't forget to purchase a copy of Perfume from Karis Books. The link is over in the chat. And of course, once we post this on YouTube, we'll have it underneath the video. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to our panel from all over the country, wherever you're joining us from, whether it be warm or a bit crisp. And thank you all at home for allowing us into your houses this evening for our wonderful, wonderful conversation. We will see you all again very, very soon. Have a wonderful evening.